friends, or good afternoon, or good morning. Depends what time you're watching this. Last night, I was supposed to do a live chat, and we were hit with some extremely massive and potentially damaging storms. So between the lightning and the thunder and my dog going crazy, it just would not make for a good recording. So I decided that I would wait until today. It's an absolutely beautiful day out, so I don't think we'll have any problems. And this video is also going to be posted on the timeline as well as on my blog. So if you can't finish watching it now, you will be able to watch it at your leisure. Now, a lot of people know that I'm an author and a historian, but most of them do not know that I'm also a musician. I have played drums for over 30 years. Growing up, I was involved in a number of rock bands. I was co-captain of the drum line. I played in the marching band, symphonic band, choir band, stage band, and percussion ensemble. I was chosen to participate in the Mellon Jazz Festival twice. I've marched on the field with the University of Pittsburgh Drumline, and I've been able to sit in and play with the Drowning, which is a very popular band in Pittsburgh. So drums have been a very important part of my life. In addition, I also had the privilege and a dream come true to write for two of the most major drum magazines out there. I have written articles and interviews for Drumhead magazine as well as Modern Drummer magazine. In addition, I also have a sister blog to the Naked Historian blog called Offbeat. And that blog has been running since I think about 2015. There's over 800 posts. There's over 30 interviews. It has hundreds and hundreds of hits every week, and it's been visited by people from 156 countries. And although I haven't posted anything there recently because I've been concentrating on the Naked Historian blog, it is still visited on a regular basis. And I do pop over there every once in a while to post something as time permits. Finally, and the most impressively I think, is as a historian and an author, I co-authored the book called Fundamentals of Drumming for Kids. And I wrote this with my friend Rich Redmond. And if you know who Rich Redmond is, he's a very famous drummer. He currently is the drummer for Jason Aldean. And Rich and I decided to write this book because we found that there was a big gap in educational materials for young kids. So we decided, we were going to solve that problem. We were going to go out and we were going to write the book ourselves. And it's not just a drum educational book. It's an activity book. It's filled with all kinds of fun puzzles and games and things that you can play that help children learn about the drums and about simple music reading. And the whole purpose of the book is to get kids excited about the instrument. Whether they pursue the drums or not, we hope that they go on to pursue music because there's such an educational benefit from learning music. So today I'm going to talk about my book, The Long Roll. It's my newest book. It's been released by Heritage Books, Inc. And the reason I decided I was going to write The Long Roll was I wanted to bridge the gap between my interests as a drummer and also as a historian. So I spent quite a bit of time doing a lot of research, in some cases more research than I have in the past, coming up with as much material as it possibly can on the life of the drummer boy. The book is featured over 85 period photographs. Some of them have not been published in the very prominently before. It has stories about the drummer boy off the battlefield and on the battlefield. It talks about Medal of Honor winners. It talks about memorable drummer boys. It shows how drummer boys were portrayed in the press and in prose and in song. It talks about the camaraderie between drummer boys from both sides and a lot other material than that. It's just a fantastic book. I'm very proud of it. I was very privileged to have Daniel Glass, who's another famous drummer. Daniel was the drummer for the swing band Royal Crown Review, and he is also a historian in addition to being a drummer. And he studies a lot about the history of the drum set and the history of drums in popular music. And I went to him and I showed him my idea and I asked him if he would be interested in posting writing the foreword to the book. And he was very gracious and he said yes he would, and he did a wonderful job. And his foreword is just a great addition to the book. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read some passages from my book. The book is available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Noble. It's available at Heritage Books, Inc. It's available on Books A Million. It's available pretty much everywhere where you can buy books. And it's also everywhere where you can buy all my other books. So while you're there, you might want to check out my other titles. That's a shameless plug. So what I'm going to start out with is I'm going to read a portion out of the introduction to the book. And my goal was to set the tone and instill an interest in the reader to want to continue. So I got very dramatic in the way that I wrote this particular introduction. And the idea is to set the scene. It goes, as morning broke, shadows awoke from their twilight slumber and began to stretch their limbs in acknowledgement of the recurring day. Below in the valley, an army was also just beginning to stir. Many soldiers, however, did not share nature's sentiments in welcoming back another sunrise. Exhausted, homesick, and terribly traumatized by the horrors they had witnessed on the battlefield, the promise of another day was nothing more than prolonged suffering. After all, weeks had turned into months, months had turned into years, and no end appeared in sight. Many felt as if they had been on campaign forever. Most were only able to find a sense of peace and comfort while sleeping, that is, when they could sleep. Looking more dead than alive, they were now faded memories of the vibrant men they had once been. Long gone was the patriotism and thrill of recruitment parades and brand new uniforms. No longer were they believers in the promise of adventure or the romance of war. Emerging from their weathered tents, some struck fires as the smell of stale coffee began to permeate the air. The gentle sounds of the surrounding countryside gave way to the neighing of irritated horses. As they began their daily rituals, muskets were inspected, swords were sheathed, and once pristine jackets were pulled on over dirty white shirts and tattered suspenders. The stillness of the morning was broken by the sound of a long roll, acting as reveille calling the men to attention. Ironically, it was the responsibility of boys to command these men to muster. Boys who had marched off to participate in a man's conflict. The army relied on the services of these boys as musicians and as communicators. Just like their counterparts, they were regulars. Military divisions had multiple drummers spread throughout their ranks, just like their counterparts. They suffered the same hardships as the men. Whether playing a monotonous cadence to keep men moving while on long marches, long rolls to call men to assemble in the mornings, or booming signals to communicate for their officers on the battlefield, the skill at which the drummers played was far too overlooked. The courage at which they had to be done was also neglected, as the youthful age of these boys paled in comparison to the men they served. The precarious risk at which they put themselves in was also equal to that of their elders, and when they were not acting in the role of musician, they served as stretcher bearers, witnessing firsthand the horrors of war and the carnage it inflicted on those who fell. As rows of anxious soldiers took the field, drummers played the call to battle to keep them assembling and in step. Lining up the rank and file, the daring infantry waited for the signal to move forward. Standing by the officers on the field, the drummer boys managed to maintain their composure despite their obvious fear. They provided critical communications to gesture movement. The scent of smoke filled the air and permeated their already dusty clothes. Once fully engaged, they often moved to the rear, exchanging their drums for makeshift stretchers. From then on, they struggled to maintain their composure as they carried their bloody comrades off the field. Perhaps that was their greatest challenge of all. Whether drumming on the march or bearing the wounded, these courageous boys quickly grew up in a man's war. They had to. So that's a portion of the introduction. I hope you enjoy that. I think that it's kind of set the scene for the courage and sacrifice of the accommodate drummer boy. It is a subject of Civil War history that is far too often overlooked. In fact, when I went to write my book on Civil War drummer boys, I looked and there were not even one or two books that focused on the drummer boy. There were a couple books that were fictional stories of the drummer boy, but there weren't any nonfiction studies that had been done to date. So I was very excited about the opportunity to make that offering available. What I'm going to read now from the book is the story of memorable drummer boys. Memorable drummer boys. These are drummer boys whose stories were not Medal of Honor stories, but were just as interesting, and these guys begged to get some attention. Some U.S. musicians mark in the ranks of the U.S. colored troops while contributing in their own way. Unlike their counterparts in the South, blacks, both free and ex-slave, were looked upon as soldiers and not camp servants. Grateful for their newfound freedom, many Southern slaves savored the opportunity to line up in Union ranks and raise their muskets toward their former oppressors. Free men from the North took the opportunity to serve as their brother's keeper. Throughout the war, drummer boys provided essential camp and field communications. One African American drummer boy of particular noteworthy service was A. H. Johnson. At the age of 16, Alexander H. Johnson was the first African American musician to enlist in the U.S. military, joining the 54th Massachusetts Volunteers under Robert Gould Shaw. And if you've seen the movie Glory, that is the story of his particular unit. Johnson was adopted by William Henry Johnson, the second black lawyer in the United States and close associate of Frederick Douglass. After the war, Johnson told an interviewer that he had beat a drum every day he had since his childhood. According to an article titled Alexander H. Johnson, the First Drummer Boy, Johnson quickly established himself as a talented drummer as he and the rest of the rank and file learned the art of soldiering. He was with the unit when it left Boston for James Island, South Carolina, where it fought its first battle. The skirmish along the South Carolina coast near Charleston occurred on July 16, 1863. Johnson himself noted, "We fought from 7 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, and we succeeded in driving the enemy back. After the battle, we got a paper saying that if Fort Wagner was charged within a week, it would be taken." 2 days later, the 54th unsuccessfully stormed the Confederate-held Fort Wagner on Morris Island while sustaining massive casualties. Johnson recounted, "Most of the way we were singing, Colonel Shaw and I marching at the head of the regiment. It was getting dark when we crossed the bridge to Morris Island. It was about 6:30 o'clock when we got there. Colonel Shaw ordered me to take a message back to the quartermaster at the wharf, who was in charge of the commissary. I took the letter by the first boat as ordered, and when I returned, I found the regiment lying down, waiting for orders to charge. The order to charge was given at 7:30 o'clock. Johnson remained with the 54th until the end of the war. In the summer of 1865, he returned to Massachusetts, bringing the drum that he carried at Fort Wagner with him. 4 years later, he married, settled in Rochester, Massachusetts, and organized Johnson's Drum Corps. He led the band as a drum major and styled himself the Major. In 1897, a memorial to the 54th, sculpted by the artist August St. Gaudens, was unveiled in Boston. The bronze relief depicts Colonel Shaw and his men leaving Boston for the South with a young drummer in the lead. A scene reminiscent of the July day in 1863 when Shaw and Johnson marched at the head of the 54th to its destiny at Fort Wagner. In 1904, Johnson visited the monument during an event hosted by the Grand Army of the Republic, the influential Association of Union Veterans. Many of those in attendance pointed out the resemblance of the Association of Union Veterans and the young lead drummer, as it said that Johnson felt a great sense of pride for his participation in the war. Today, the statue remains as a timeless tribute to both Johnson and the men he served. That's an extraordinary story because, the African Americans' contributions to the Civil War only started to get a lot of credit over the last decade, and it's wonderful that this gentleman and his words have been saved for future generations. Perhaps the most photographed drummer of the American Civil War was Robert Henry Hendershot. He was known as the drummer boy of the Rappahannock. His nickname supposedly came from the reputed heroics at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Virginia in December of 1862. Hendershot enlisted in Company B, 9th Michigan Infantry in the March of 1862 and was taken prisoner that July at the Battle of Stones River. After his release, he joined the 8th Michigan Infantry, although he suffered from regular seizures. While awaiting discharge for epilepsy, Henderson arrived on the banks facing Fredericksburg, where the Army of the Potomac was preparing to attack the city. The Army of Northern Virginia was waiting on the banks of the Rappahannock River, defending the city while pontoon bridges were being built. The delay enabled General Robert E. Lee to move the Confederate Army into a formidable position. When the Union engineers arrived, they came under attack from rebel sharpshooters. So on December 11, 1862, the 7th Michigan Infantry volunteered to cross the river under enemy fire and drive the rebel sharpshooters from their nets. According to the account of the events, Henderson's wanderings had taken him to the riverbank that morning. He later claimed that he helped push off the first boat, slipped when he tried to climb aboard, and made the voyage across the river while clinging to the gunwale. A dispatch from the scene describes a drummer boy only 13 years old who volunteered and went over with the first boat and returned laden with curiosities picked up while there. A correspondent for the Detroit Advisor and Tribune wrote that the boy belonged to the 8th Michigan Infantry, reports of the episode appeared in the press. The young hero remained nameless until late December when Hendershot visited the offices of the Detroit Free Press and Detroit Advertiser and Tribune, claiming to be the drummer boy of the Rappahannock. Hendershot's story was repeated in national papers, including the New York Tribune. Its publisher, Horace Greeley, presented Hendershot with a silver drum. For the next 8 weeks, Hendershot performed at the P.T. Barnum Museum, and then spent a few weeks more in Poughkeepsie, New York, at the Eastman Business College, which had rewarded him heroism with a scholarship. Many historians have questioned the story of the drummer boy of the Rappahannock. The only ones who knew the truth were the witnesses who were present at the boat's launching and Hendershot himself. Following the war in July 1891, Hendershot posted a letter to the Grand Army of the Republic newspaper, the National Tribune, restating his claim to be the title Drummer Boy of the Rappahannock, as well as that of Youngest Soldier. He was by then one of the best-known veteran drummer boys in the country, and despite the ongoing controversy, he always stood by his claims before dying of pneumonia on December 26, 1925. Riding on the coattails of his fame, Hendershot often made public appearances. In 1891, the Grand Army of the Republic held their national meeting in the city of Detroit. Hendershot was invited to participate in the parade. Members of the 7th Michigan who had contested Hendershot's story were livid at the thought of who they considered to be a fraud participating in their affair. Hendershot performed Marching Through Georgia for a crowd of 200 with a new drum that was gifted to him. His son performed at his side on the fife. A local dignitary recited the term poem, The Drummer Boy of the Rappahannock, much to the crowd's cheers. The opening stanza went, "'Twas a question if the nation should such tender youth employ as Robert Henry Hendershot, the little drummer boy, a prodigy at drumming, being only 12 years old, and a prodigy of valor, as the story has been told. At the Fredericksburg's great battle, the soldiers heard the rattle of his drum." Offended members of the 7th Michigan publicly dischallenged the celebrity to produce even one witness who had seen him in Fredericksburg. In response, Hendershot produced letters from President Lincoln, General Ulysses Grant, and Horace Greeley attesting to his heroism. The crowd was nearing the point of violence when the 7th's own drummer boy, John S. Spillane, a captain of the Detroit police force, entered the room. "There is the drummer boy of the Rappahannock," shouted a fellow veteran. They hurried Spillane to the platform and unceremoniously removed Hendershot from the room. After the meeting, the citizens of Detroit presented Spillane with a medal proclaiming him, not Hendershot, to be the real drummer boy of the Rappahannock. The youngest drummer boy, and perhaps the youngest recruit in the U.S. Army has ever seen, was Edward Black. On July 4, 1862, the then 8-year-old drummer boy was recruited as a member of the 21st Indiana Infantry. He was told to return home, but quickly disobeyed that order. Later that year, and a year older, he enlisted again, but this time with his father's permission. He was captured at the Battle of Baton Rouge, but released when the city fell. Black was discharged in September of 1862. He once again re-enlisted in February of 1863 and served with the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery until January of 1866. He died at age 19 in 1872 and was buried along with his twin brother Edwin in the Crown Hill National Cemetery in Indianapolis. His drum is part of the collection at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. Little Morris was one of the youngest boys enlisted on either side of the Civil War. Morris survived the conflict and left behind a legacy that became a legendary story in the press. At the tender age of 10 and a half, Morris was presented to Captain J. Murray of Company D, 19th Virginia Infantry. Despite his young age, he was accepted to fulfill the role of a drummer boy. At that time, Company D, he was the youngest enlistee on either side of the war. After being treated harshly by the men of Company D, Morris transferred to Company A. 19th Virginia Battery of Artillery, where he served under Captain J.F. Chalmers until the end of the war. Following the war, Morris grew up to be a popular citizen around Richmond who shared his experiences from the war. His drumsticks and portrait were put on display. The youngest boy to die in the Civil War also happened to be a drummer boy. Edwin Charles King was 12 and a half years old when he enlisted in the Union Army on September 12, 1861. His father had great pains about his son going off to war, but Captain Benjamin Sweeney of Company F, 49th Regiment, Pennsylvania Volunteers, reassured the nervous parent that he would try and keep Charles out of harm's way. The young drummer boy saw his first action at the Battle of Williamsburg, where the Union Army retreated off to the Virginia Peninsula after engaging Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Prior to the next battle, Charles was promoted to drum major and made a full Union soldier. He was only 13 years old. In September of 1862, the regiment marched to western Maryland to take part in the Battle of Antietam, which took place on September 17th. The 49th Regiment took few casualties, but things turned when a Confederate shell exploded at the rear of the line. Several men were wounded, including Charles, who was shot by shrapnel. The wound was through the body and deemed mortal. His father, who was also serving in the Union Army, was summoned to the field hospital. He did not make it in time. After 3 days of pain, Charles died on September 20th. No one knows what happened to his remains. Some have guessed that he was buried at Antietam, but there is no record that supports that theory. A monument was placed near his parents' graves in the Greenmount Cemetery in Weston to preserve his sacrifice and preserve the Union. Clarence Mackenzie was a mere 12 years old when he marched off to war as a member of Brooklyn's 13th Regiment. Tragedy befell him in June of 1861 when he was encamped at Annapolis, Maryland. It was during a training drill that Mackenzie was accidentally struck by a stray ball fired by his fellow soldiers. As a result, he became Brooklyn's first casualty of the Civil War. Mackenzie's body was returned home and buried in a public lot in the Hill of Graves at Greenwood Cemetery. He was later relocated to the Soldiers' Lot, which Greenwood donated specifically for Civil War veterans. His grave is marked with a striking white bronze monument forged in his likeness. The ornate pedestal carrying the statue stands approximately 10 feet in height and is inscribed, "Erected by the Drum and Bugle Corps of the 13th Regiment, NGSNY, in memory of Clarence D. Mackenzie, born February 8, 1849, died in Annapolis, Maryland, June 11, 1861, aged 12 years, 4 months, and 3 days." The last drummer boy we're going to take a look at is perhaps the most famous of all time, Johnny Clem. At the age of 10, Johnny Clem tried to enlist in the newly formed 3rd Ohio Regiment, but was turned away again and again. He later attempted to join the 22nd Michigan, who eventually allowed him to follow the regiment as a mascot and drummer boy. Clem became a national celebrity after his actions at Chickamauga. Armed with a musket that was sawed down to accommodate his size, Clem joined in the defense of Horseshoe Ridge on the afternoon of September 20th. As Confederate forces breached the line and surrounded the defenders, a colonel was said to have yelled, "Give me that damn little Yankee." Rather than surrender, Clem shot the officer and made his way back to the Union lines. For his brave actions, Clem was promoted to a sergeant and the youngest non-commissioned officer in the entire Union Army. According to his bio, in October of 1863, Clem was captured in Georgia by Confederate cavalrymen while detailed as a train guard. The Confederates confiscated his U.S. uniform, which reportedly upset him terribly, including his cap, which had 3 bullet holes in it. He was included in a prisoner exchange a short time later, but the Confederate newspapers used his age and celebrity status for propaganda purposes to show what sore straits the Yankees are driven when they have to send their babies out to fight us. Clem fought in several battles, including the battles of Perryville, Murfreesboro, Kennesaw, and Atlanta. He was wounded twice and was discharged from the Army at the age of 13. He would later attend West Point. Clem died in 1937 and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Those are just some stories about these young drummer boys, I use some of the younger ones to kind of make a point of the courage and sacrifice of these. They're literally boys. They're literally children. You heard from what I read. 8 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old. It's just astonishing that children that young would feel the desire to serve their country and to help preserve the Union. It's absolutely amazing. And the fact that they were in battle, all drummer boys, under fire, giving communications through their commanding officers, telling the soldiers where to turn, where to line up, which way to pivot, and things like that, and hold their composure enough to not only be brave to stay where they were standing, but to play the wide variety of rudiments that they were required to play in order to fulfill their role. So I hope you enjoyed those little tidbits. I hope that you'll be interested enough to go out and seek the book, The Long Roll, Wartime Experiences of the Civil War Drummer Boy, written by myself. I will be doing some more of these in the near future, reading some of the chapters in their whole to let you know exactly, what the content of this book is like. I hope that this was enough of a preview to give you the interest to seek out the book yourself. So until then, God bless.